The Guild of Bonds stood like a monument to ancient magic in the heart of Illyrium's capital, its crystalline spires reaching toward the heavens as if trying to touch the very source of fate itself. Within its walls, the future of countless souls was decided through ritual and prophecy, through the sacred art of blood magic that determined which alpha would claim which omega, which beta would serve which house, and which unions would strengthen the realm's magical foundations. Kalen stood before the massive oak doors, his mixed heritage making him an anomaly even among the guild's diverse clientele. Half human, half something else that even he couldn't fully identify. He possessed the pure blood of an omega while lacking the submissive nature that society expected from his kind. His dark hair caught the morning light, revealing streaks of an unusual silver that marked him as different, while his green eyes held a sharpness that made most alphas uncomfortable. This was his 7th attempt at finding a bonded mate through the guild's services, and he could feel the weight of failure pressing down on his shoulders like a physical burden. Each previous attempt had ended the same way. The ritual would begin, the blood would be drawn, and then nothing. No spark of recognition, no surge of magical compatibility, no bond forming between him and whichever carefully selected candidate had been deemed suitable by the prophecy charts. The interior of the guild was a maze of corridors lined with portraits of successful bondings, their faces frozen in expressions of magical bliss as their souls intertwined for eternity. Kalen had once dreamed of seeing his own portrait among them, but 7 failures had taught him that some dreams were simply not meant to be. Prophetess Miranda awaited him in the consultation chamber, her ancient face creased with the weight of centuries spent reading the threads of fate. She looked up from her crystal viewing sphere with an expression of weary resignation that told Kalen everything he needed to know before she even spoke. "Kalen," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been wrong about matters of the heart. "I've reviewed your case again, consulted the celestial charts, examined every possible combination of compatible bloodlines. The conclusion remains the same. You are an aberration in the system." The words hit him like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to wound. "An aberration," he repeated, tasting the bitterness of the label. "That's what you call someone who doesn't fit into your neat little categories?" "I call it what it is," Miranda replied, her tone brooking no argument. 7 failed bonding attempts, each with carefully selected candidates who should have been perfect matches according to every prophecy and divination technique known to our order. You resist the natural instincts that should guide you toward your destined mate. You question the wisdom of the bond itself. You are, quite simply, a distortion in the natural order. Kalen felt his magic stirring beneath his skin, responding to his emotional turmoil. The pure blood that flowed through his veins was more than just a marker of his omega status. It was a conduit for power that most didn't understand. "Perhaps," he said, his voice carrying an edge of defiance, "the problem isn't with me. Perhaps the problem is with your system. The system has worked for thousands of years," Miranda countered, her eyes flashing with protective anger. "It has created bonds that have shaped the very foundations of our society. Alliances that have prevented wars and unions that have strengthened the magical bloodlines of every major house. You cannot simply dismiss millennia of proven wisdom because it fails to accommodate your particular difficulties." "My particular difficulties," Kalen repeated, standing from his chair with fluid grace. "You mean my refusal to submit to the first alpha who shows interest? My insistence on having a choice in who I bond with? My belief that I deserve more than to be treated as a breeding tool for someone else's magical enhancement?" The prophetess's expression softened slightly, revealing a glimpse of the woman beneath the institutional authority. "Kalen, I understand your frustration, truly I do, but you must consider the possibility that you were simply meant to walk a different path. Not every omega is destined for a bonding. Some are meant to serve the greater good in other ways, to use their gifts for the benefit of society rather than a single mate." "You're telling me to give up," Kalen said, his voice flat with resignation, "to accept a life of solitude because I don't fit into your predetermined molds. I'm telling you to consider that perhaps you were created not to be bound, but to be free," Miranda replied. "There is honor in such a fate, even if it's not the one you originally desired." Kalen looked around the chamber one final time, taking in the ceremonial altars where countless bondings had been sealed, the walls covered in ancient symbols that pulsed with their own inner light, the very air thick with the residue of magical connections forged over centuries. Then he smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Or perhaps, he said, his voice carrying a note of quiet determination, I was created to break your system entirely. He left the Guild of Bonds that day with no intention of returning. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. The night of choosing was approaching, the grand ceremony where unbonded individuals could attempt to find their matches through direct magical contact rather than prophetic guidance. It was considered a last resort, a desperate measure for those who had failed through conventional means. Kalen had no intention of participating, but the letter that arrived at his modest apartment 3 days later changed everything. It was written on parchment that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and the seal bore the mark of the extinguished Flame Clan, a house so infamous that even speaking their name was considered unlucky. The message was brief and to the point. Your presence is requested at the night of choosing ceremony. Attendance is not optional. Failure to comply will result in classification as aberrant and permanent exile from all guild territories. Kalen crumpled the letter in his fist, feeling the magical compulsion woven into the parchment trying to enforce obedience. His mixed heritage made him resistant to such crude manipulation, but the threat was clear enough. Attend the ceremony or be branded an outcast forever. The ceremony was held in the guild's grand ballroom, a space that had been magically expanded to accommodate hundreds of participants. Crystalline chandeliers cast rainbow light across the assembled crowd, while the air itself seemed to shimmer with anticipation and barely contained magical energy. Alphas, betas, and omegas mingled according to carefully established protocols, their interactions governed by centuries of tradition and social expectation. Kalen stood at the edge of the crowd, his formal robes marking him as a participant despite his reluctance. The ritual would begin at midnight, when the barriers between the physical and magical worlds were thinnest. Until then, he was free to observe the complex dance of courtship and negotiation that preceded any serious bonding attempt. It was during this preliminary phase that he first noticed the stranger. The man stood alone near the chamber's eastern wall, his isolation so complete that it seemed almost supernatural. He was tall and lean, with the pale skin and sharp features that marked him as demon-born. But there was something else about him that set him apart from the other supernatural beings in attendance. His dark hair was pulled back in a style that spoke of noble birth, and his clothes, while perfectly tailored, seemed to absorb light in a way that made him appear to exist in his own pocket of shadow. But it was the mark on his throat that truly captured Kalen's attention. The tattoo was clearly visible despite the man's attempts to hide it with the high collar of his coat, a stylized flame that seemed to flicker and dance even though it was permanently etched into his skin. Kalen recognized it immediately from his studies of clan histories and forbidden genealogies. The extinguished Flame Clan, the house that had been banned from participating in bonding ceremonies for over a century, ever since the tragedy that had cost them their heir and nearly destroyed the magical balance of the entire realm. Kalen found himself moving toward the stranger before he consciously decided to do so, drawn by a curiosity that overrode his usual caution. The man noticed his approach and turned, revealing eyes that seemed to hold depths no mortal gaze should possess. "You shouldn't be here," Kalen said, his voice carrying just enough volume to be heard over the crowd's murmur. "The extinguished Flame Clan is forbidden from participating in bonding ceremonies." The stranger smiled, and the expression was sharp enough to cut glass. "And yet here I am," he replied, his voice carrying the cultured tones of someone accustomed to command. "Perhaps the rules have changed, or perhaps I simply don't care about rules that were written by people who feared what they couldn't understand." "I'm Kalen," he said, extending his hand in a gesture that was part greeting, part challenge. "And you are?" "Tyrion," the stranger replied, clasping the offered hand with his own. "Tyrion Melzar, heir to the extinguished Flame Clan, and apparently your partner for this evening's entertainment." The moment their skin made contact, the world exploded into sensation. Kalen felt power surge through him like liquid fire, his Omega nature responding to Tyrion's presence in ways that defied everything he thought he knew about magical compatibility. The bond mark that had remained dormant through 7 failed attempts suddenly blazed to life, appearing on both their wrists in the form of intertwined flames that burned with golden light. Around them, the crowd gasped in shock and amazement. Bond marks were supposed to appear only after a formal ceremony, only when both parties willingly accepted the connection. They were not supposed to manifest spontaneously, and they were certainly not supposed to burn with the intensity that was currently radiating from Kaelin and Tyrion's joined hands. "This is impossible," Kaelin breathed, staring at the mark that now adorned his wrist. "The bond hasn't been formalized. The ritual hasn't been performed. This shouldn't be happening." "And yet it is," Tyrion replied, his own voice tight with a mixture of wonder and fear. "Tell me, Kaelin, does your blood lie? Because mine has never been wrong about matters of the heart." Before Kaelin could respond, the crowd around them began to press closer, drawn by the spectacle of a spontaneous bonding. He could hear whispers spreading through the assembled guests, a mixture of excitement and concern as news of the impossible event spread throughout the ballroom. "We need to get out of here," Kaelin said, his voice urgent. "This kind of attention is the last thing either of us needs." But it was too late. The guild officials had already been summoned, and Prophetess Miranda was pushing through the crowd with an expression of barely contained shock. Behind her came the ceremonial guards, their hands resting on weapons that crackled with suppression magic. "Step away from each other," Miranda commanded, her voice carrying the authority of centuries of practice. "This bonding is not authorized. The mark must be examined and verified before any connection can be considered legitimate." "The mark appeared on its own," Kaelin protested, even as he found himself reluctant to release Tyrion's hand. "We didn't perform any ritual. We barely touched. Which is exactly why it must be investigated," Miranda replied, her eyes fixed on the golden flames that continued to burn around their joined hands. "Spontaneous bondings are extremely rare and potentially dangerous. Until we understand what has happened here, both of you are subject to guild custody and supervision." The next several hours passed in a blur of tests and examinations. Kaelin found himself separated from Tyrion, each of them subjected to a battery of magical diagnostics designed to determine the nature and strength of their unexpected connection. The results, when they came, were both shocking and unprecedented. 97% compatibility, the guild examiner announced, his voice filled with professional amazement. "In all my years of service, I have never seen a match this strong. The magical resonance between your bloodlines is so complete that it's almost as if you were specifically designed to complement each other." Kaelin felt a chill run down his spine. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Miranda said, entering the examination chamber with a grim expression, "that you have two choices. You can formalize the bond through a proper ceremony, accepting all the responsibilities and restrictions that come with such a connection. Or you can both be classified as aberrant and banned from any future bonding attempts." The ultimatum hung in the air like a curse. Kaelin had spent years fighting against the guild's attempts to force him into unwanted connections, and now he found himself facing the same coercion in a different form. Accept the bond with a demon he barely knew, or be branded an outcast forever. "I need time to think," he said finally. "This isn't a decision that should be made hastily." "Time is exactly what you don't have," Miranda replied. "The mark that has appeared on both of you is unstable. Without proper ritual reinforcement, it will either fade completely or burn out of control. You have 3 days to decide." Those 3 days were unlike anything Kaelin had ever experienced. He and Tyrion were assigned to joint custody in the guild's residential quarters, their movements monitored and their interactions carefully supervised. It was during this forced proximity that he began to learn about the demon who had apparently become his destined mate. Tyrion was nothing like the submissive, eager alphas who had been presented to him during his previous bonding attempts. The demon was controlled to the point of coldness, his every word and gesture carefully calculated to reveal nothing of his inner thoughts or feelings. He spoke little about his past, and when he did, it was in clipped, formal sentences that conveyed information without offering any real insight into his character. But Kalen was observant, and he began to notice things. The way Tyrion's hands trembled slightly when he thought no one was watching. The haunted expression that would sometimes flicker across his face when he thought he was alone. The careful way he positioned himself to avoid accidental contact with anyone, as if he feared his very touch might cause harm. It was on the second day of their confinement that Kalen finally confronted him about it. "You're afraid," he said, his voice cutting through the silence that had dominated their shared evening meal. "You're afraid of this bond, of what it might mean, of what it might do to both of us." Tyrion looked up from his untouched food, his dark eyes reflecting the candlelight like mirrors. "Fear is a luxury I cannot afford," he replied, his voice carefully neutral. "I have responsibilities, obligations that go beyond personal desires or concerns." "That's not an answer," Kalen pressed, leaning forward across the small table that separated them. "You're avoiding the question, just like you've been avoiding any real conversation since this started. What happened to your previous Omega? What tragedy cost your clan their standing in the bonding community?" For a moment, Tyrion's carefully controlled mask slipped, revealing a glimpse of the pain that lay beneath. "You don't know?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You haven't heard the stories about the extinguished flame and their cursed heir?" "I know your clan was banned from bonding ceremonies," Kalen said. "I know it had something to do with a death, a magical accident that was covered up by the guild. But I don't know the details." Tyrion was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the flickering candle between them. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of years of guilt and self-recrimination. "His name was Elias," he said. "He was my bonded mate, chosen through all the proper channels, blessed by the guild, celebrated by both our houses. He was everything an Omega should be: gentle, supportive, eager to please. He loved me with a devotion that I didn't deserve and couldn't return with equal measure." "What happened to him?" Kalen asked, his voice soft with understanding. "I killed him," Tyrion replied, the words falling like stones into still water. "Not intentionally, not through malice, but through my own inability to control the power that flows through my bloodline. During our bonding ceremony, something went wrong. The connection between us became too strong, too intense. My magic began to drain his life force, consuming him from the inside out. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late." The confession hung in the air between them, a raw wound that had never properly healed. Kalen felt his heart clench with sympathy for the demon who had been carrying such a burden for so long. "That's why you're afraid," he said, understanding flooding through him. "You're afraid that the same thing will happen again, that your power will destroy anyone who tries to get close to you." "I know it will happen again," Tyrion corrected, his voice firm with conviction. "The curse that destroyed Elias is still part of me, still burning in my blood. I am dangerous, Kalen. I am a threat to any Omega who might be foolish enough to bond with me. That's why I came here tonight, not to find a mate, but to prove to the guild that I am beyond redemption." "And yet the bond mark appeared anyway," Kalen pointed out. "Despite your expectations, despite your fears, despite everything you believe about yourself, our compatibility is undeniable. What does that tell you?" Tyrion looked at him with an expression of desperate hope mixed with deep-seated terror. "It tells me that fate has a cruel sense of humor," he said, "or that I am about to destroy yet another innocent soul." The third day of their confinement brought news that changed everything. The guild had decided to assign them a joint task, a mission that would serve as both a test of their compatibility and a way to determine whether their bond was stable enough to formalize. They would be sent to retrieve an ancient artifact from the ruins of the sunken temple, a place where the barriers between the physical and magical worlds were thin enough to be dangerous. They would not be going alone. Rowan, a werewolf from the Forest Knight clan, had been assigned as their guide and protector. The werewolf appeared at their quarters the evening before their departure, his massive frame filling the doorway as he introduced himself with quiet courtesy. "I'm Rowan," he said, his voice carrying the deep rumble that marked him as an alpha of significant power. "I'll be accompanying you on your mission to ensure your safety and provide any assistance you might need." Kalen found himself immediately drawn to the werewolf's calm presence. Where Tyrion was all sharp edges and barely contained power, Rowan seemed solid and steady, like a mountain that had weathered countless storms. His dark hair was streaked with premature silver, and his eyes held the kind of wisdom that came from experiencing both great joy and terrible loss. "You're the guild's librarian," Kalen said, recognizing him from his previous visits to the archives. "I've seen you in the restricted sections, working with the ancient texts." "Among other duties," Rowan replied, his gaze lingering on Kalen with an intensity that made the Omega's heart skip. "I also serve as a guide for expeditions into dangerous territories. The Sunken Temple is not a place to be taken lightly." The mission briefing was conducted the next morning in the guild's war room, a circular chamber lined with maps and tactical displays. The artifact they were seeking was known as the Memory Mirror, an ancient device that could extract and display the deepest memories and experiences of anyone who gazed into its surface. It had been lost for over a century, hidden in the ruins of a temple that had been swallowed by the earth during a magical cataclysm. "The temple is dangerous," their briefing officer explained, pointing to markers on a detailed map. "The magical energies that destroyed it are still active, creating pockets of temporal distortion and reality displacement. You'll need to work together to navigate the hazards and retrieve the artifact without triggering any of the defensive mechanisms that may still be active." The journey to the Sunken Temple took them through some of the most beautiful and treacherous terrain in the realm. Ancient forests gave way to crystalline canyons, which in turn opened onto vast plains where the very air shimmered with magical energy. Throughout the journey, Kalen found himself observing the complex dynamics between his two companions. Tyrion maintained his usual emotional distance, speaking only when necessary and keeping his interactions with both Kalen and Rowan strictly professional. But Kalen could sense the demon's internal struggle, the way he fought against his own desire to connect with them on a deeper level. Rowan, meanwhile, proved to be an ideal traveling companion. He was knowledgeable about the terrain, skilled at making camp and finding food, and possessed of a dry sense of humor that helped lighten the mood during the long days of travel. But more than that, he seemed to understand Kalen in ways that few others did. "You're not what I expected," Rowan said one evening as they sat around their campfire, the flames casting dancing shadows across his weathered features. "Most Omegas I've met are either completely submissive or overcompensating for their perceived weakness. You're neither. I'm what happens when someone refuses to fit into the boxes society creates for them," Kalen replied, his voice carrying a note of sardonic humor. "I'm what they call an aberration in the system." "The system is flawed," Rowan said simply. "It reduces complex individuals to simple categories, ignoring the fact that people are more than just their magical nature or their social designation." "You're not an aberration, Kalen. You're just someone who refuses to be diminished by other people's expectations." The conversation was interrupted by a sound that made all three of them freeze, a low, haunting howl that seemed to come from the very earth beneath their feet. Rowan was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the sword at his side. "Shadow wraiths," he said grimly. "They're drawn to strong magical signatures, and the combination of your bond mark and the artifact's proximity has created a beacon they can't resist." The attack came without warning, dark shapes rising from the ground like living shadows. The creatures were incorporeal, able to phase through physical matter at will, but they were vulnerable to magical attacks. Tyrion's power blazed to life, streams of silver fire pouring from his hands to strike at the wraiths, while Rowan's sword glowed with protective enchantments. But it was Kalen who provided the key to their survival. His Omega nature, combined with his mixed heritage, allowed him to perceive the wraiths' true forms and predict their movements. He called out warnings and tactical advice, coordinating their defense with an efficiency that surprised even himself. "Behind you!" he shouted to Tyrion, who spun just in time to incinerate a wraith that had been preparing to drain his life force. "Rowan, there's a group of them circling around to your left." The battle was intense but brief. When the last of the wraiths had been destroyed, The three of them stood together in the aftermath, breathing heavily and covered in the residual energy that clung to the creature's remains. "That was impressive," Rowan said, looking at Kalen with newfound respect. "You have natural tactical instincts that most warriors spend years developing." "It's not instinct," Kalen replied, his voice thoughtful. "It's necessity. When you're different, when you don't fit into the expected patterns, you learn to see things that others miss. You learn to find advantages where others see only obstacles." Tyrion, meanwhile, was staring at his hands with an expression of wonder and terror. "I didn't lose control," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My power responded to your direction, followed your guidance. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in command of my abilities rather than simply struggling to contain them." The admission hung in the air between them, a crack in the armor of self-control that Tyrion had maintained since their first meeting. Kalen felt his heart clench with understanding and something that might have been hope. The sunken temple, when they finally reached it, was unlike anything Kalen had ever seen. The structure seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its walls shifting between solid stone and translucent crystal depending on the angle from which they were viewed. The air around it shimmered with temporal distortions, and the very ground seemed to pulse with the rhythm of some vast, sleeping heartbeat. "The memory mirror is somewhere in the central chamber," Rowan explained as they approached the entrance. "But the path to reach it is treacherous. The temple's defenses are still active, and they're designed to trap intruders in recursive loops of their own memories." The interior of the temple was a maze of corridors that seemed to rearrange themselves when no one was looking. Kalen found himself relying heavily on his intuitive understanding of magical currents to navigate the shifting pathways, while Tyrion's power provided protection against the various traps and hazards they encountered. It was in the temple's deepest chamber that they found the memory mirror, and it was there that Kalen finally learned the truth about Tyrion's past. The artifact was a massive disk of polished obsidian, its surface so perfectly reflective that it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. As they approached, it began to resonate with their presence, images flickering across its surface like fragments of half-remembered dreams. "Don't look directly at it," Rowan warned. "The mirror shows the deepest truths of anyone who gazes into it, and some truths are too painful to bear." But Kalen was already staring into the mirror's depths, drawn by a compulsion he couldn't resist. The images that appeared were not his own memories, but Tyrion's, played out in stark detail for all to see. He saw a younger Tyrion, full of hope and eager to prove himself worthy of his family's legacy. He saw the bonding ceremony with Elias, the joy and celebration that had surrounded their union. And then he saw the tragedy that had followed. Not the loss of control that Tyrion had described, but something far more complex and heartbreaking. Elias had not died from magical drain. He had died from a curse that had been placed on him by enemies of the extinguished Flame Clan, a curse designed to activate during the bonding ceremony and destroy both members of the pair. Tyrion had not lost control of his power. He had used it to save Elias, pouring his own life force into his mate in a desperate attempt to counteract the curse. The plan had partially succeeded. Elias had lived long enough to reveal the truth about the curse and to forgive Tyrion for his inability to save him. But the damage had been done, and the guilt had consumed Tyrion ever since. "You didn't kill him," Kalen said, his voice filled with understanding and compassion. "You tried to save him. The curse was designed to destroy you both, and you managed to prevent that from happening." "I failed him," Tyrion replied, his voice broken with old pain. "I couldn't protect him from our enemies, couldn't save him from the fate they had planned for him. I am weak, Kalen. I am unworthy of the trust you have placed in me." "You're not weak," Kalen said firmly, reaching out to take Tyrion's hand. "You're wounded. You're carrying a burden that isn't yours to bear. But that doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." The touch of their hands sent power coursing through both of them, and the bond mark on their wrists blazed with golden light. Around them, the temple's magical defenses began to respond, recognizing the strength of their connection and the purity of their intentions. "The mirror," Rowan said urgently. "You need to claim it now, while the temple's defenses are dormant." Kalen approached the memory mirror with careful steps, his hand extended toward its obsidian surface. As his fingers made contact with the artifact, he felt a surge of power that was both familiar and utterly alien. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and for a moment he saw not the past but the future. A vision of himself and Tyrion standing together, their bond fully realized and their love finally acknowledged. "I claim this artifact in the name of the Guild of Bonds," he said, his voice carrying the formal cadence required for such ceremonies. "I accept the responsibility that comes with its power and swear to use it only for the betterment of all." The mirror's surface solidified, and the artifact detached itself from its mounting with a sound like breaking glass. As Kalen lifted it from its resting place, he felt the weight of centuries of accumulated memories and experiences, all held within the obsidian disk. The journey back to the guild was completed in record time, their success with the memory mirror having earned them recognition and respect from even the most conservative members of the organization. But the real test was yet to come, the formal evaluation of their bond and the decision about whether it would be recognized as legitimate. The hearing was held in the guild's great hall, with representatives from all the major houses and clans in attendance. Kalen and Tyrion stood before the assembled dignitaries, their bond mark clearly visible on their wrists, while Prophetess Miranda reviewed the evidence of their compatibility. "The magical resonance between these two individuals is unprecedented," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "Their compatibility rating exceeds anything in our records, and their successful completion of the retrieval mission demonstrates that their bond is not only stable but beneficial to both parties." "However," she continued, and Kalen felt his heart sink, "there are concerns about the spontaneous nature of their connection. Bonds that form without proper ritual oversight can be unstable, potentially dangerous to both the individuals involved and the community at large." The debate that followed was intense and often heated. Some argued that the bond should be recognized and celebrated as a triumph of natural compatibility over artificial constraints. Others contended that allowing such an unprecedented connection to be formalized would set a dangerous precedent that could undermine the entire system of regulated bonding. In the end, it was Rowan who provided the crucial testimony that swayed the decision. The werewolf stood before the assembly with quiet dignity, his words carrying the weight of centuries of experience. "I have observed these two individuals under conditions of extreme stress and danger," he said, his voice steady and sure. "I have seen them work together with a harmony that most bonded pairs take years to achieve. Their connection is not only genuine but necessary, not just for their own happiness, but for the stability of the magical forces that bind our community together. Moreover," he continued, "I have served as a witness to their character and intentions. Kalen is not the aberration that some have claimed him to be, but an individual of remarkable strength and integrity. Tyrion is not the cursed heir that his family's reputation suggests, but a man of honor who has been carrying an undeserved burden for far too long. Together, they represent the best of what bonding can achieve. Not just the joining of two individuals, but the creation of something greater than the sum of its parts." The final vote was closer than Kalen had hoped but decisive nonetheless. The guild formally recognized their bond, with all the rights and responsibilities that such recognition entailed. They would be free to formalize their connection through a proper ceremony, to establish a household together, and to take their place as full members of the magical community. But even as the announcement was made, Kalen could see the dissatisfaction in the faces of some of the assembled representatives. The old guard, the traditionalists who had built their power on the existing system, were not pleased with this disruption of their carefully maintained order. "This is not over," one of them said as the assembly dispersed. "A bond that forms outside the proper channels is an affront to everything we stand for. Mark my words, this precedent will have consequences that none of us can foresee." The threat was clear enough, but Kalen found that he didn't care. He had fought too hard and suffered too much to be intimidated by the disapproval of people who valued conformity over love. As he and Tyrion left the hall together, their fingers intertwined and their bond mark glowing with warm light, he felt a sense of completion that had been missing from his life for as long as he could remember. The formal bonding ceremony was held a month later, in the guild's most sacred chamber. The ritual was beautiful and moving, a celebration of their choice to commit themselves to each other despite all the obstacles that had been placed in their way. Friends and allies from across the magical spectrum attended, their presence serving as a testament to the bridges that love could build between different communities. Rowan was there, of course, serving as Kaelin's witness and offering his blessing to their union. The werewolf had become a close friend over the weeks following their return from the sunken temple, and Kaelin had come to value his steady presence and wise counsel. "I'm happy for you," Rowan said as the ceremony concluded, his voice carrying genuine warmth despite the sadness in his eyes. "You deserve this happiness, both of you. You've fought for it, earned it through your courage and determination." "Thank you," Kaelin replied, sensing the deeper emotions that lay beneath the werewolf's congratulations. "For everything. For believing in us when others didn't. For supporting us when we needed it most. You've been more than a friend, you've been family." As the celebration continued around them, Kaelin found himself standing with Tyrion on the guild's observation deck, looking out over the city that had become their home. The bond mark on their wrists had evolved over the past month, the simple flames now surrounded by intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change with their emotions. "Do you have any regrets?" Tyrion asked, his voice soft with uncertainty. "About choosing me over the safer path, about accepting a bond that goes against everything the guild traditionally stands for?" Kaelin considered the question seriously before answering. "I regret the pain we've both had to endure to get here," he said finally. "I regret the years you spent believing you were cursed, and I regret the time I wasted trying to force myself into molds that were never meant to fit me. But I don't regret choosing you. I don't regret fighting for what we have." "The guild elders are right about one thing," Tyrion said, his arm tightening around Kaelin's waist. "Our bond is unprecedented. We're setting a precedent that could change everything about how magical relationships are formed and maintained. Are you prepared for that responsibility?" "I'm prepared for whatever comes," Kaelin replied, leaning into his mate's embrace. "Because I won't be facing it alone. We'll meet every challenge together, just like we have from the beginning." The months that followed were a time of adjustment and growth. Their bond continued to deepen and strengthen, creating a connection that went far beyond the physical or even the magical. They learned to work together with an efficiency that amazed even their supporters, their complementary abilities making them formidable partners in both professional and personal endeavors. Kaelin found himself taking on new responsibilities within the guild, his unique perspective and proven abilities making him valuable in ways that his previous failures had never suggested. He became an advocate for other unbonded individuals, helping them navigate the complex system of magical matchmaking and find connections that honored their true nature rather than forcing them into predetermined roles. Tyrion, meanwhile, began the slow process of rebuilding his family's reputation. The truth about Elias's death had been revealed during their temple mission, and the evidence of the curse that had been placed on him had vindicated the extinguished Flame Clan of the charges that had been leveled against them. Slowly, carefully, they began to reclaim their place in the magical community. But their greatest challenge was yet to come. The conservative factions within the guild had not forgotten their opposition to the unprecedented bond, and they were quietly working to undermine the precedent that Kaelin and Tyrion had established. Rumors began to circulate about the dangers of unregulated bonding, about the potential for chaos if traditional safeguards were abandoned. The crisis came to a head during the Festival of Harmonies, the annual celebration where bonded pairs from across the realm gathered to renew their vows and celebrate their connections. Kaelin and Tyrion were participating in the ceremony when a group of masked figures attacked, their goal apparently to disrupt the festival and prove that unconventional bonds were inherently unstable. The battle was fierce but brief. Kaelin and Tyrion fought side by side, their bond allowing them to anticipate each other's movements and coordinate their attacks with deadly precision. Their combined power was formidable, but it was their emotional connection that proved to be their greatest strength. As the last of the attackers was subdued, the assembled crowd erupted in cheers and applause. The attempted disruption had backfired spectacularly, serving only to demonstrate the strength and stability of the bond that the conservatives had sought to discredit. "You see," Prophetess Miranda said, her voice carrying over the crowd's excitement. This is what true bonding looks like. Not the forced compatibility of arranged matches, but the chosen harmony of souls that recognize each other across all boundaries. The victory was significant, but Kalen knew that their struggles were far from over. There would always be those who feared change, who preferred the safety of tradition to the uncertainty of progress. But they had proven that love could indeed conquer the barriers that society erected, that choice could be more powerful than destiny. As they stood together in the aftermath of the battle, surrounded by friends and allies who had supported them through their journey, Kalen felt a deep sense of satisfaction. They had not only found love but had helped to change the very foundations of how such love was recognized and celebrated. "What happens now?" Tyrion asked, his voice soft with wonder. "We've achieved everything we set out to do. We're bonded, we're accepted, we've even managed to change the system that tried to keep us apart. What comes next?" Kalen looked around at the celebrating crowd, at the faces of other couples who had found their own unconventional paths to happiness, at the guild officials who were already discussing new policies to accommodate the growing number of self-initiated bonds. "Now we live," he said simply. "We build a life together. We continue to fight for others who need our help. And we prove every day that love is worth fighting for." The years that followed were marked by continued change and growth. The guild gradually reformed its policies, moving away from the rigid system of prophetic matchmaking toward a more flexible approach that honored individual choice and personal compatibility. Kalen and Tyrion became leaders in this movement, their own story serving as an inspiration to countless others who had previously felt trapped by societal expectations. They established their own household in the hills overlooking the capital, a place where they could retreat from the pressures of public life and simply enjoy each other's company. The house was filled with books and artifacts, reminders of their shared work and individual interests, but it was also a home in the truest sense, a place where they could be themselves without masks or pretense. Rowan became a frequent visitor, his friendship with both of them deepening over time. The werewolf had never bonded himself, claiming that he preferred the freedom of solitude, but Kalen suspected that his friend's heart held its own secrets and sorrows. Whatever the truth, he was always welcome in their home, his presence adding warmth and wisdom to their domestic life. "You've built something beautiful here?" Rowan said one evening as they sat together on their terrace, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Not just your relationship, but the change you've helped bring about in the world around you. We couldn't have done it without friends like you," Kalen replied, raising his glass in a toast. "To the bonds we choose, the families we create, and the love that makes it all worthwhile. To choice over destiny," Tyrion added, his own glass gleaming in the evening light. "To the courage to fight for what we believe in, even when the odds are against us. To the future," Rowan concluded, his voice warm with affection for both of them. "May it be everything you've dreamed it could be." As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, Kalen reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The scared, defiant Omega who had once stood in the Guild of Bonds, declaring his intention to break their system, had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. Not through destruction, but through the simple act of choosing love over fear, hope over despair, and connection over isolation. The bond mark on his wrist had evolved once again, the golden flames now intertwined with silver threads that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. It was beautiful and unique, a symbol of everything they had built together and everything they hoped to achieve in the years to come. "I love you," he whispered to Tyrion, the words carrying the weight of everything they had shared and everything they planned to share in the future. "And I love you," Tyrion replied, his voice soft with the wonder that still overcame him when he contemplated the miracle of their connection. "More than I ever thought possible, more than I ever dared to hope for." As they sat together under the star-filled sky, surrounded by the life they had built and the love they had chosen, Kalen knew that they had found something truly precious. Not just happiness, but purpose. Not just love, but the courage to fight for that love against all odds. The system that had once branded him an aberration had been transformed by their example, opening doors for countless others who had previously felt trapped by society's expectations. They had proven that choice could be more powerful than destiny, that love could indeed conquer the barriers that divided people, and that sometimes the greatest victories came not from conforming to expectations, but from having the courage to defy them. Their story would be told for generations to come, a tale of two souls who had found each other across the boundaries of species and tradition, who had fought for their right to love freely and had helped to change the world in the process. But for now, in this moment of perfect peace and contentment, they were simply two people who had chosen each other and who would continue to choose each other every day for the rest of their lives. The bond that had begun with an accidental touch and had grown through trials and tribulations was now complete, sealed not just by magic, but by the deeper force of genuine love and mutual respect. They had broken the prophecy not by destroying it, but by proving that some things were more powerful than fate itself. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. The seasons turned, and with them came new challenges and deeper revelations. Their bond, now fully mature and recognized throughout the realm, began to manifest in ways that even the most learned scholars had never documented. Kalen found that his empathic abilities had expanded exponentially, allowing him to sense the emotional currents of entire communities rather than just individuals. This gift proved invaluable in his work mediating disputes between different magical factions, but it also meant that he carried the weight of others' pain and joy in ways that sometimes threatened to overwhelm him. It was during one particularly difficult mediation session between the Fire Courts and the Shadow Realm representatives that Kalen first experienced what would later be called a bonding overflow. The emotional tension in the room had reached a breaking point, with centuries of mistrust and grievance threatening to explode into open conflict. As Kalen struggled to maintain neutrality while absorbing the intense emotions of both sides, he felt his control slipping. The overflow began as a warm sensation in his chest, spreading outward through his bond mark and connecting him not just to Tyrion but to every person in the room. Suddenly, the Fire Court delegates could feel the deep loneliness and fear that drove the Shadow Realm's aggressive negotiating stance. The Shadow representatives experienced the protective fury that motivated the Fire Court's territorial claims. And through it all, Kalen served as a conduit, allowing each side to truly understand the other's perspective for the first time in generations. The effect was transformative. Within hours, agreements that had been stalled for months were signed and sealed. Ancient grudges were set aside in favor of mutual understanding. And Kalen collapsed from the effort, his body unable to process the sheer volume of emotional energy he had channeled. Tyrion found him in their private chambers, curled up on their bed with tears streaming down his face. The demon's own bond mark was glowing with sympathetic resonance, sharing the burden of his mate's expanded abilities. "The pain," Kalen whispered, his voice barely audible. "I can feel everyone's pain, their fear, their anger. It's too much, Tyrion. I don't know how to control it." "You don't have to control it," Tyrion said, gathering his mate into his arms with infinite gentleness. "You just have to learn to channel it, to use it as a bridge rather than a burden." Over the following weeks, they worked together to develop techniques for managing Kalen's enhanced empathy. Tyrion's own power, which had once seemed purely destructive, proved to be the perfect complement to his mate's abilities. Where Kalen absorbed emotions, Tyrion could transform them, burning away the negative aspects while amplifying the positive connections. Their collaboration became legendary within the guild. Disputes that had previously taken months or even years to resolve were settled in days through their combined efforts. They developed new protocols for magical mediation, training programs for other bonded pairs, and theoretical frameworks that revolutionized the understanding of how magical bonds could enhance rather than limit individual abilities. But it was their personal relationship that truly flourished during this period. The challenges they faced together only strengthened their connection, teaching them to rely on each other in ways that went far beyond the physical or even the magical. They learned to share not just their bodies and their power, but their dreams, their fears, and their deepest aspirations. "I never thought I could be this happy," Kalen said one evening as they walked through the guild's moonlit gardens. "Even in my most optimistic moments, I never imagined that love could feel like this." "Like what?" Tyrion asked, his hand warm and secure in his mate's. "Like coming home," Kalen replied, stopping to face his demon with eyes that shone with unshed tears of joy. like finding a part of myself that I didn't even know was missing, like discovering that I'm not just accepted for who I am, but cherished because of it. Tyrion pulled him close, their bond marks resonating in harmony, as their lips met in a kiss that tasted of eternity and promise. Around them, the garden's magical flowers bloomed in response to their shared joy, their petals glowing with soft light that reflected the depth of their connection. It was during this period of professional success and personal fulfillment that they received news that would change everything once again. A messenger arrived at their home bearing a scroll sealed with the mark of the High Council, the governing body that oversaw all magical guilds and clans throughout the realm. The message was brief but momentous. Kaelin and Tyrion had been selected to serve as the first bonded ambassadors to the Outer Realms, a newly created position that would require them to travel to the distant dimensions where other forms of magical civilization had developed. Their mission would be to establish diplomatic relations, share knowledge and techniques, and determine whether the bonding practices that had proven so successful in their own realm could be adapted to other magical cultures. The appointment was both an honor and a challenge. No one from their realm had ever traveled to the Outer Realms, and the few reports that existed suggested that the magical laws and social structures there were fundamentally different from anything they had encountered. But the High Council believed that their unique bond and proven abilities made them the ideal candidates for such a groundbreaking mission. "It's everything we've worked for," Tyrion said as they discussed the appointment over dinner. "A chance to prove that our way of bonding, our approach to magical relationships, can work anywhere. We could help other beings find the same happiness we've discovered. And we could learn so much," Kaelin added, his eyes bright with intellectual excitement. "Think of the knowledge we could bring back, the techniques we could share. This could be the beginning of a new era of magical cooperation." But the appointment also meant leaving behind everything they had built, everyone they had come to care about. Rowan, in particular, struggled with the news of their departure. The werewolf had become such an integral part of their lives that the thought of leaving him behind was almost unbearable. "How long will you be gone?" he asked during their farewell dinner, his voice carefully controlled despite the emotion Kaelin could sense beneath the surface. "At least 5 years," Tyrion replied honestly. "Possibly longer, depending on what we discover. The Outer Realms are vast, and there are dozens of different magical cultures to contact and study." 5 years, Rowan repeated, his wine glass trembling slightly in his hand. "That's a long time to be apart from the people you care about." Kaelin reached across the table to clasp his friend's hand, feeling the werewolf's carefully hidden heartache through their long-standing emotional connection. "We'll come back," he promised. "No matter what we discover out there, no matter how long it takes, we'll come back. This is our home, and you're our family." "I know," Rowan said, his smile both sad and genuine, "and I'll be here waiting when you do. Someone has to keep the conservatives in line while you're gone." The departure ceremony was held in the guild's Great Hall, with representatives from every major magical faction in attendance. The portal that would carry them to the Outer Realms was a masterwork of collaborative magic, requiring the combined efforts of dozens of skilled practitioners to create and maintain. As they stood at the threshold of the portal, Kaelin felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. They were about to embark on a journey that would take them further from home than any of their people had ever traveled. They would encounter forms of magic and types of beings that existed only in theoretical texts and ancient legends. "Are you ready?" Tyrion asked, his hand steady and warm in Kaelin's. "I'm terrified," Kaelin admitted with a laugh. "But I'm also more excited than I've ever been. We're about to make history. Love. We're about to discover things that could change everything. Together," Tyrion said, lifting their joined hands to kiss Kaelin's knuckles. "Whatever we find out there, we'll face it together." The portal activated with a sound like thunder, and they stepped through into the unknown. The sensation of interdimensional travel was unlike anything either of them had experienced. A feeling of being stretched across impossible distances while simultaneously being compressed into a single point of consciousness. When the sensation faded, they found themselves standing in a place that defied description. The sky above them was a tapestry of colors that had no names, shifting and flowing like liquid aurora. The ground beneath their feet was crystalline, reflecting the impossible sky in fractal patterns that seemed to extend into infinity. And the air itself was alive with magical energy so pure and concentrated that it made their bond marks glow with sympathetic resonance. "Where are we?" Kalen whispered, his voice carrying an odd echo in the alien atmosphere. "The Nexus," came a voice from behind them. They turned to see a being approaching, humanoid in basic shape but composed entirely of what appeared to be living starlight. "The crossing point between all realms. I am Ethan, guardian of the Nexus. We have been expecting you." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of discovery and wonder. The Nexus served as a hub for dozens of different magical realms, each with its own unique approach to power, consciousness, and social organization. Some were inhabited by beings of pure energy, others by creatures so alien that communication required magical translation. But all of them were fascinated by the concept of bonding as practiced in Kalen and Tyrion's realm. "Your connection," Ethan explained during one of their orientation sessions, "is unique in the multiverse. Most magical beings form temporary alliances or hierarchical relationships based on power dynamics. But you have created something that transcends individual identity while still preserving personal autonomy. It is remarkable." Their first diplomatic mission took them to the realm of eternal seasons, where the inhabitants existed in a state of constant magical flux, their very bodies changing with the cycles of nature. The beings there were initially skeptical of the bonding concept, unable to understand how two individuals could maintain a stable connection when their own identities were so fluid. But as Kalen and Tyrion demonstrated their bond in action, the way they could anticipate each other's needs, share magical energy, and work together with perfect coordination, the seasonal beings began to show interest. Some even began experimenting with temporary bonding rituals, creating connections that lasted for single seasons before dissolving and reforming in new configurations. "You have given us a new way to think about connection," the Autumn Queen told them during their formal farewell ceremony. "We who change with every season had not considered that there might be constants that transcend our transformations. You have planted seeds of possibility that will grow long after you have departed." From there, they traveled to the crystalline reaches, where silicon-based beings had developed forms of magic based on harmonic resonance. The crystalline entities were fascinated by the emotional aspects of bonding, having never experienced feelings as biological creatures understood them. Through careful experimentation, they learned to create sympathetic resonances that mimicked the emotional connections of bonded pairs. Each realm they visited presented new challenges and opportunities. In the void depths, they encountered beings of pure thought who existed without physical form, leading to philosophical discussions about the nature of love and connection that lasted for months. In the prismatic gardens, they met entities who existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, forcing them to expand their understanding of what it meant to share a bond across different planes of existence. But it was in the realm of broken mirrors that they faced their greatest test. The inhabitants of this dimension had once possessed a form of bonding similar to their own, but some ancient catastrophe had shattered their ability to form lasting connections. The beings there existed in a state of perpetual loneliness, unable to truly touch or know each other despite their desperate desire for connection. "We remember what it was like," the Mirror Queen told them, her voice carrying the weight of eons of solitude. "We remember love, connection, the joy of shared existence. But when we try to recreate those bonds, they shatter like glass. We are forever alone, forever yearning for what we can never have." The challenge was unlike anything they had faced before. Here were beings who desperately wanted what Kalen and Tyrion had, but who seemed physically incapable of achieving it. The magical catastrophe that had befallen their realm had left them with a fundamental inability to form stable connections with others. "We have to try," Kalen said as they discussed the situation in their temporary quarters. "If there's even a chance that we can help them, we have to make the attempt." "The risk is enormous," Tyrion warned, his expression troubled. "If we fail, we might end up like them, cut off from each other, unable to maintain our own bond. We could lose everything we've built together. And if we succeed," Kalen countered, "we could restore something that was lost, help an entire realm rediscover the joy of connection. Isn't that worth the risk?" The ritual they devised was complex and dangerous, requiring them to temporarily sever their own bond and use themselves as conduits to help the Mirror Queen reconnect with her subjects. The process was agonizing, like tearing away a part of their souls, but they maintained their resolve through sheer force of will and love for each other. As their bond dissolved, Kalen felt the terrible emptiness that must have plagued the mirror beings for countless eons. The loss was so complete, so devastating, that he almost forgot what it felt like to be connected to another soul. But even as despair threatened to consume him, he held onto the memory of Tyrion's love, using it as an anchor to prevent himself from being lost entirely. The magic flowed through them, carrying the pattern of their bond into the mirror realm's fundamental structure. For a moment, the barriers that had prevented connection began to weaken, and Kalen felt the desperate hope of the mirror beings as they reached out to each other across the gulf of their isolation. And then, miracle of miracles, the connections began to form. Tentative at first, fragile as gossamer threads, but real. The Mirror Queen gasped as she felt the presence of her subjects for the first time in millennia, and they responded with joy so pure and intense that it blazed through the magical matrix like a star being born. The effort nearly destroyed both Kalen and Tyrion, but as the mirror beings' connections stabilized, they felt their own bond snapping back into place with a force that left them breathless. They had done it, they had restored what was lost, given back the gift of connection to an entire realm. "Thank you," the Mirror Queen said, her voice now filled with warmth and joy instead of endless sorrow. "You have given us back our souls, our ability to love and be loved. We will never forget this gift." Word of their success in the realm of broken mirrors spread throughout the Nexus, establishing their reputation as more than just ambassadors, but as healers of the deepest magical wounds. Requests for their assistance came from realms they had never heard of, beings who had heard tales of their ability to forge connections where none should exist. But even as their fame grew, Kalen and Tyrion never forgot their true mission. They were there not just to help others but to learn, to grow, to discover new ways of understanding love and connection that they could bring back to their own realm. Each successful mission taught them something new about the nature of bonds, the power of choice, and the infinite variations that love could take. Years passed like dreams in the outer realms, where time itself flowed differently than in their home dimension. They aged slowly, their bonds sustaining them through trials that would have broken lesser connections. They learned to communicate with beings of pure energy, to share emotions with creatures who had never known physical form, to create temporary connections that could bridge the gaps between incompatible magical systems. And through it all, their love for each other only grew stronger. The challenges they faced together, the wonders they discovered, the lives they touched, all of it served to deepen their understanding of what they meant to each other and what they could accomplish together. "Do you ever miss it?" Tyrion asked one evening as they stood on the observation deck of the Nexus, watching the aurora-like displays that marked the boundaries between different realms. "Our old life, the simplicity of just being together without all these responsibilities?" "Sometimes," Kalen admitted, leaning into his mate's embrace. "But then I think about all the connections we've helped create, all the love we've made possible, and I know that this is what we were meant to do. We weren't just meant to be happy together. We were meant to share that happiness with the multiverse. Even if it means being apart from home for so long?" Tyrion asked, his voice soft with understanding. "Home isn't a place," Kalen replied, turning in his arms to face him. "Home is wherever you are. And as long as we're together, we're exactly where we belong." As their 5th year in the Outer Realms drew to a close, they received word that their original mission had been extended indefinitely. The High Council had been so impressed with their reports, so amazed by the diplomatic successes they had achieved, that they wanted them to continue their work permanently. But for the first time since their arrival, Kalen and Tyrion found themselves homesick. They missed their friends, their familiar surroundings, the simple pleasures of their life together, without the constant pressure of representing their entire realm. Most of all, they missed Rowan, whose letters had become increasingly infrequent as the years passed. "We've done what we came to do," Tyrion said as they discussed the council's offer. "We've proven that our form of bonding can work anywhere, that love truly is universal. Maybe it's time to let others carry on the work while we return to our own lives." The work here is far from finished, Kalen pointed out, though his heart wasn't entirely in the argument. There are still dozens of realms to contact, so many beings who could benefit from what we've learned. And there are others who can continue that work, Tyrion replied. We've trained new ambassadors, established protocols, created a foundation that others can build upon. Our greatest contribution wasn't just in the connections we made, but in the techniques we developed for making those connections possible. In the end, the decision was made for them. An emergency message arrived from their home realm, carried by a portal that shimmered with urgency. Rowan was dying, succumbing to a magical plague that had swept through the werewolf territories. He had requested their presence not for healing. The plague was beyond cure, but for farewell. They left the outer realms within hours, their hearts heavy with grief and anticipation. The journey home seemed to take forever, even though they traveled through the fastest dimensional corridors available. When they finally emerged from the portal in the guild's great hall, they found a world that had changed in their absence. The guild itself had evolved, incorporating many of the techniques and philosophies they had sent back in their reports. Bonded pairs now served in leadership positions throughout the magical community, their enhanced abilities making them ideal for complex diplomatic and administrative tasks. The rigid hierarchies that had once defined magical society had given way to more fluid, collaborative structures that emphasized cooperation over competition. But it was Rowan who captured their immediate attention. Their old friend was confined to a bed in the guild's medical wing, his once powerful frame wasted by the plague that was slowly consuming his magical essence. Yet his eyes still held the same warm intelligence they remembered, and his smile was as genuine as ever. "You came," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't sure. The message might not have reached you in time." "We came as soon as we heard," Kalen said, taking his friend's hand and feeling the fever that burned through his weakened body. "We should have been here sooner. We should never have stayed away so long." "Don't," Rowan said firmly. "Don't regret the work you've done. The reports you sent back, the techniques you developed, they've changed everything here. You've helped create a world where love is valued over power, where connection is seen as strength rather than weakness. You've given us all something to aspire to." They spent the remaining days of Rowan's life at his bedside, sharing stories of their adventures in the outer realms and listening to his accounts of the changes that had occurred in their absence. The werewolf faced his approaching death with the same quiet dignity he had brought to everything else in his life, offering comfort to them rather than seeking it for himself. "I want you to know," he said during one of their final conversations, "that watching you two together, seeing the love you've built, has been one of the greatest joys of my life. You proved that happiness is possible, that love can conquer anything. That's a gift I'll carry with me wherever I'm going." When Rowan died, it was peacefully, surrounded by the two people he had loved most in the world. His last words were a blessing on their bond, a final affirmation of the love they had chosen and the life they had built together. The funeral was attended by hundreds of beings from across the magical spectrum, all of whom had been touched by Rowan's wisdom and kindness. But for Kalen and Tyrion, it was also a homecoming, a return to the community they had served for so long from afar. "We're home," Kalen said as they stood together in the cemetery, watching the sun set over the familiar landscape of their youth. "Finally, truly home. And we're here to stay," Tyrion added, his arm tightening around his mate's waist. "No more long journeys. No more years apart from the people we love. We've done our part to change the multiverse. Now it's time to enjoy the world we've helped create." As they walked back toward the guild, toward the life they had built together and the future they would share, Kalen reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. They had started as two broken souls, each carrying wounds that seemed impossible to heal. They had found each other against all odds, chosen love over fear, and in doing so had helped to transform not just their own lives but the very foundations of magical society. The bond mark on their wrists had evolved once again during their time in the outer realms, now incorporating symbols and patterns from dozens of different magical traditions. It was a testament to their journey, a reminder of all they had learned and all they had accomplished together. But more than that, it was a symbol of hope, Proof that love truly could conquer anything, that choice was more powerful than destiny, and that sometimes the greatest victories came not from following the expected path, but from having the courage to forge a new one entirely. Their story had become legend, told in realms across the multiverse as an example of what was possible when two souls found their perfect match. But for Kalen and Tyrion, it was simply the beginning of a love that would endure for eternity, growing stronger with each passing day and each new challenge they faced together. The Omega who had once been called an aberration and the demon who had believed himself cursed had found their happily ever after, and in doing so had shown the entire multiverse that love, real love, was indeed the most powerful force in all existence.